The League of Nations, the world's first attempt to prevent another world war. The world after World War I. Imagine Europe in 1918, millions dead, entire cities reduced to rubble, empires collapsing overnight, and a generation traumatized by trench warfare unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The First World War had become so devastating that many believed civilization itself might not survive another conflict like it. So after the guns finally fell silent, world leaders asked a question no one had seriously attempted before. What if nations could solve disputes without war? That idea would become the League of Nations. It was humanity's first grand experiment in collective security. A global organization designed to stop wars before they started, but within just 2 decades the world would descend into an even more catastrophic conflict. World War II. So what happened? Why did the League fail? Could it ever have succeeded? And how did its collapse reshape the modern world? This is the story of the League of Nations. Part 1. Woodrow Wilson's Vision. The origins of the League of Nations began during the final months of World War I. In 1918, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson introduced his famous 14-point speech. Wilson believed the old balance of power politics of Europe had failed. Secret alliances, militarism, and nationalism had dragged the world into catastrophe. His solution was revolutionary for the time. An international organization where countries could negotiate disputes peacefully before they escalated into war. The idea quickly gained support among intellectuals, diplomats, and peace activists across Europe. For many, it represented hope, a belief that perhaps humanity could finally move beyond endless cycles of war. After the armistice, Wilson traveled to Paris for the massive peace negotiations that would become the Treaty of Versailles. At the center of those negotiations was one goal Wilson considered essential: the creation of the League of Nations. Part 2. The Paris Peace Conference. In 1919, delegates from victorious Allied powers gathered in Paris. The conference was dominated by 3 major leaders: Woodrow Wilson from the United States, David Lloyd George from Britain, Georges Clemenceau from France. Wilson pushed aggressively for the League. Britain generally supported the idea. France, however, remained skeptical. French leaders feared Germany might recover and launch another war. To them, military security mattered more than idealistic diplomacy. Still, the League of Nations was formally approved as part of the Treaty of Versailles. Its covenant established a new international structure: an assembly, a council, and a secretariat headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. The League officially came into existence on January 10, 1920. At first, it appeared to be a historic breakthrough. Nearly 50 nations joined. For the first time in history, countries had created a permanent international body dedicated to preserving peace. Part 3. The shocking absence of the United States. Ironically, the country whose president had created the League never joined it. Back in America, many politicians feared the League would pull the United States into foreign conflicts. Leading the opposition was Senator Henry Cabot Lodge. He argued that joining the League could weaken American sovereignty. Wilson fought back fiercely. He traveled across the country trying to convince the American public to support the treaty. But during the exhausting tour, Wilson suffered a severe stroke. Without his leadership, support collapsed. The U.S. Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, and the United States never became a member of the League of Nations. This decision severely weakened the organization before it even fully began. Without America's economic and military power, the League lacked the authority needed to enforce many of its decisions. Part 4. Early Successes. Despite its weaknesses, the League did achieve several important successes during the 1920s. It helped resolve territorial disputes between smaller nations before they escalated into war. One major example involved the Åland Islands dispute between Finland and Sweden. Both nations claimed ownership of the islands. The League investigated the issue and negotiated a peaceful settlement. Another success came during tensions between Greece and Bulgaria in 1925. After border violence erupted, the League intervened quickly. The fighting stopped before it turned into a larger war. The organization also became involved in humanitarian work. It helped resettle refugees after World War I. It fought against disease. It worked against slavery and human trafficking. And it assisted countries facing economic collapse. For a time, it seemed possible that international cooperation might actually work. Part 5. The League's Fatal Weaknesses. But beneath the surface, serious problems were growing. The League had no army. It could issue condemnations. It could recommend sanctions. But it could not force powerful countries to obey. Everything depended on member nations voluntarily cooperating. And when major powers ignored the rules, the League struggled to respond. Another problem was that decisions often required unanimous agreement. That made quick action extremely difficult. Many governments also prioritized national interests over collective security. When conflicts became dangerous or politically inconvenient, countries hesitated to act. The League worked reasonably well when dealing with smaller nations. But the real test would come when aggressive major powers challenged the system itself. And in the 1930s, that test arrived. Part 6. Japan, Italy, and the Collapse of Authority. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria in China. The League condemned the invasion, but Japan simply ignored the criticism and withdrew from the organization. The League could do nothing to stop it. Then came another disaster. In 1935, Benito Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. Ethiopia appealed desperately to the League for help. Economic sanctions were imposed against Italy, but key materials like oil were excluded. Britain and France feared pushing Mussolini too hard because they wanted Italy as an ally against a rising Germany. Again, the League appeared weak and indecisive. Soon after, Adolf Hitler openly violated the Treaty of Versailles. Germany rearmed, expanded militarily, and eventually seized territory across Europe. The League condemned these actions, but failed to stop them. By the late 1930s, confidence in the organization had collapsed. Aggressive dictators had learned an important lesson. The League of Nations could protest, but it could not enforce peace. Part 7. World War II and the End of the League. When World War II began in 1939, the League of Nations was effectively powerless. Many member states declared neutrality. Others were quickly invaded by Nazi Germany. As Europe collapsed into total war, the League slowly dismantled its operations in Geneva. The organization formally ceased to exist in 1946. But even though it failed, the League left behind something important. Its creators had identified a real problem. Modern wars were too destructive for nations to manage alone. After World War II, world leaders tried again. This time, they created the United Nations. The UN borrowed many ideas from the League: international cooperation, collective security, global diplomacy, and humanitarian coordination. But it also attempted to fix some of the League's biggest weaknesses. Unlike the League, the United Nations included the United States from the beginning. And its Security Council was designed around the reality of great power politics. In many ways, the League of Nations became the blueprint for the modern international system. A failed dream or a necessary lesson. So was the League of Nations a complete failure? In one sense, yes. It failed to stop World War II, it failed to control aggressive dictatorships, and it failed to preserve lasting peace. But its story is more complicated than that. The League represented the first serious global attempt to replace war with diplomacy, and many of the ideas it introduced still shape international politics today. Its collapse taught the world painful lessons about power, cooperation, and the limits of idealism. Lessons that remain relevant even now, because the same question that haunted leaders after World War I still exists today. Can nations truly work together to prevent another global catastrophe? Or will history repeat itself once again?